Hi, my name is Gisette, and our topic for today is Managing Visitor Attractions, Chapter 10. The aims of this chapter are to identify the importance of the notion of sustainability to visitor attractions, highlight the relevance of visitor impacts to the issue of sustainability, outline the major impacts of visitor on visitor attractions, examine a range of tools for managing visitor impacts, and discuss the findings of a study of visitor impacts at visitor attractions. It is widely acknowledged that visitor attractions play an important, perhaps even pivotal role in the world tourism industry. Large open purpose-built visitor attractions are increasingly being employed as instruments of economic regeneration, particularly in rundown urban areas and in locations where traditional forms of tourism have been in decline. Even larger destination-style so-called mega attractions are also now appearing all over the world. These are often linked to the aspiration of governments to establish growth poles in relatively underdeveloped areas, Disneyland Paris being a good example. Then, there is the growing number of World Heritage Sites representing the crown jewels of the world's natural and cultural heritage, and forming the mainstay of the tourism industry of many countries. At the other end of the scale, meanwhile, there is a multitude of smaller visitor attractions, many of which are independently owned and operate almost on a casual basis. Visitor attractions often represent a major factor in drawing tourists to a particular destination. Visitors to the United Kingdom, for example, typically cite the desire to experience the nation's unique heritage and culture as the most important reason for their trip, and visitor attractions are clearly an important medium of such experiences. Yet, the visitor attractions sector presently faces the unenviable problem of being pulled between contradictory demands. On the one hand, most visitor attractions are based on specific natural-built, manufactured, or cultural assets, the distinctiveness and quality of which forms the core of their products. Opening such sites to visitors carry with it the risk of exposing these self-same assets to a range of potential visitor impacts. Consequently, visitors can compromise the very things that they are coming to see. Even in purpose-built attractions, negative visitor impacts such as overcrowding and traffic congestion around the site can serve to reduce the quality of the visitor experience. As with any other form of business, unless customers receive a product that satisfies their expectations, they will not return to purchase it again, and nor will they recommend it to others. On the other hand, it is axiomatic that visitor attractions needs visitors in order to achieve their objectives. Whether these are attempting to make profits for their owners, earning revenues to pay for the continuing protection and conservation of the site, educating the public, or fulfilling a wider social function. For many visitors attractions, particularly those that are purpose-built, opening to visitors is their fundamental raison d'etre. For others, being open to the public for at least limited periods of the year is a feature of their ownership, especially when they are owned by membership organizations such as the National Trust in England and Wales. For others again, receiving paying visitors represent an economic lifeline. Without paying visitors, the asset upon which the visitor attraction is based would inevitably have to be sold, converted to alternative uses, or fall into disrepair. The dilemma for visitor attraction is that, generally speaking, the greater the exposure of the site to visitors, the greater is the potential for negative visitor impacts to arise. The incidence of such impact not only serves to threaten the continued economic viability of the visitor attraction as a commercial concern, but also raises serious questions about the sustainability of the attraction. Historic buildings, for example, are under constant threat from the natural elements the effect of pollution, the rest of fire, and the ravages of time. Visitor impacts can, however, seriously exacerbate such problems. For example, the structural integrity of Craigiebure Castle in Scotland has been compromised literally by the weight of visitor numbers, whose unrelenting passage the management of visitor attractions through the upper floors has left them unsafe for continued public access. Meanwhile, the growing volume of visitors to the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt, is thought to have been responsible for a major roof collapse in Tomb of City First. The presence of visitors at such fragile sites is clearly a mixed blessing in terms of achieving and maintaining sustainability. While visitors bring the revenues that many sites so badly need to fund their conservation and restoration efforts, they also bring with them impacts that can make them need for such efforts all the more real and urgent. Sustainability requires that these contradictory demands are effectively tackled, and that a means is found of enabling both access to visitors and the effective protection of the site and its content from being damaged by those visitors. Typically, the response of visitor attraction has been to introduce some form of visitor management, the aim being to moderate the impacts of visitors while still enabling them to come onto the site, interact with the assets on which the attraction is based, and achieve a satisfying experience from their visit.
Hi, my name is Billy. Let's now proceed to the types of visitor impact. Visitor attractions are subject to a wide range of negative visitor impacts. A report by the English Tourist Board 1991 suggests that visitor impacts tend to fall into the following categories: overcrowding, wear and tear, traffic-related problems, impacts on local community, and the impacts of visitor management itself on the authenticity of visitor attractions. So now, let's identify each categories. First is overcrowding. The problem of overcrowding is highly dependent on the capacity of the site to receive visitors. When a visitor attraction becomes overcrowded, visitors begin to get under each other's feet. The result being that everyone finds it increasingly difficult to move around the site. Once a visitor are no longer able to keep moving, queues will begin to form at bottlenecks. Overcrowding might therefore occur either at the level of the site as a whole or in particular parts of it. The impacts of overcrowding are typically evidenced by visitors feeling that they are unable to appreciate the character or ambience of a site, a reduced opportunity for visitors to see and do everything they want to, and a consequent negative impact on visitors' satisfaction. Of course, overcrowding is a highly subjective issue. What feels overcrowded to one person may not seem overcrowded to another, while what is considered to be too long a queue for one person will be perfectly acceptable to another, and they will happily wait in it. Second is wear and tear. This group of visitor impacts includes trampling, handling, humidity, temperature, buffering, and graffiti. Trampling involves visitors walking on sensitive parts of the site, ranging from carefully manicured lawns to antique carpets and stately homes to the very fabric of ancient monuments. Trampling may be deliberate or accidental, and is especially likely when the site becomes congested. Handling, on the other hand, is more likely to be a deliberate act on the part of the visitor, who cannot resist putting sticky or moist fingers on fragile items, even when they are requested not to do so. Humidity and temperature, meanwhile, are always unintentional on the part of the visitor. However, they are often unavoidable if the site is to be open to visitors in significant numbers. The problem is not generally the levels of humidity and temperature themselves, which can quite easily be controlled, but the rapid changes in environmental conditions that tend to occur as visitors move around the site. Pilfering and graffiti, meanwhile, are intentional acts on the part of the visitor. Pilfering can range from petty theft in the gift shop or cafeteria to the theft of valuable exhibits. While the former might be considered a relatively minor problem in terms of the protection of the site, it may nevertheless have important implications for the cash flow and general financing of the attraction. Similarly, graffiti can range from being a minor blemish on the ambience of the site to becoming a very real issue in terms of its protection. Traffic-related problems. Most visitors tend to arrive at a visitor attraction by motor car or by coach. Yet, many sites predate the invention of the automobile and were not therefore designed to cope with the traffic generated by visitors. Others are located within city centers where visitor-generated traffic may exacerbate existing traffic problems. Traffic-related problems include traffic congestion, pollution from vehicle exhaust, the increased risk of accidents, damage to verges and lawns due to poor parking, the restriction of access by thoughtlessly parked cars and coaches, and vibration damage to buildings. Traffic problems may be persistent or merely occasional, evidencing themselves only at peak times. They may also be restricted to the site itself or, particularly if the attraction only has a limited amount of parking space, spill over into the locality. Small historic cities are particularly vulnerable to traffic-related visitor impacts, with relatively small and enclosed city centers being swamped by visitors in the high season. Impacts on the local community. Many visitor impacts can spill out into the local community. A possible impact on the local community may result from the thoughtless and antisocial behavior of visitors. Visitors may be accused of rudeness towards local people, treating them without due respect or even as curiosities provided as part of the visitor attraction experience. Visitors in large numbers can also cause congestion in local facilities, such as shopping areas or leisure centers. As a result, the local community can come to feel besieged by visitors and perceive them to have a negative influence on the local community. At the same time, it is possible to envisage impacts running in the opposite direction, that is, local people having a negative impact on the visitor experience. Impacts of visitor management on the authenticity of the attraction. Interestingly, the ETB report also identifies the potential of visitor management itself to have damaging impacts on the authenticity of the visitor attraction and the experience it offers. These impacts may take the form of the provision of visitor facilities, for example, direction signs or handrails, may have a detrimental effect on the ambience of the attraction. Adaptations made in order to enhance visitor flow around the site may be considered architecturally inappropriate or felt to compromise the architectural integrity of the site. Adaptations made to enable access by disabled visitors, for example, lift or ramp, may necessitate the use of inappropriate equipment or materials. There may be a tendency towards intrusive interpretation, or interpretation that is not faithful to the history of the site. These impacts might be considered even more invidious than those outlined above, since they raise the possibility that taking action to remedy visitor impacts might actually result in a worse situation to that which would have arisen in the absence of such efforts. The dilemma for visitor management then becomes not simply how to manage visitor impacts, but whether to manage them.
Hi, my name is Sheila, and today's next topic is techniques for managing visitors' impacts. The technique of visitors management can be divided into those that are designed to regulate supply and those that are designed to manage demand for visitors' attraction. Supply-side techniques. This group of techniques attempts in a number of different ways to increase the capacity of the sites to receive visitors without unduly damaged or the visitor's experience otherwise being impaired. Queue management. When the demand for the visitor's attraction exceeds the capacity of the site to receive a visitors, queues will begin to form. Typically, this takes the form of pedestrian queues outside admission points or lines of motor vehicles outside of the main gate. Queues can have a number of adverse impacts on the visitor's experience, and this is according to Barlow 1999, including visitors may feel that their enjoyment of the experience offered by the attraction is impaired because they have had to spend a considerable amount of time in queues, either to enter the attraction or see specific parts of it. Some potential visitors may turn away when they see the length of the admission queue. Others may join the queue but become bored when it moves forward only slowly, and will go and find something else to do instead. Other potential visitors may be put off from visiting the attraction because it has gained a reputation of lengthy queue. In order to try to eliminate the queues, staff may be forced to spend less time with each visitor. Certain time-consuming features or services may have to be abandoned entirely. Staff may become demoralized because they have insufficient time to meet visitors' needs and provide high-quality experience for every visitor. Queue management is often the first response to the problem of excess demand, since most other visitor management techniques will take more time to implement. Queue management techniques includes the following: snaking the queues so that they appear to move faster, providing literature and displays, perhaps like audio-visuals, to distract visitors while they queue, bringing the queues farther into the property so that visitors can experience its ambience while they wait, and lastly, entertaining the visitors while they are waiting in the queue. None of these measures will of course reduce the size of the queue. They will merely make waiting in the queue more bearable. As much queue management cannot realistically be viewed as a long-term remedy to the problem of overcrowding and congestion. Number 2, making capacity more flexible. Given a sufficient length of time, visitor attractions can take a number of measures to make their existing capacity more flexible. This can help to reduce or even eliminate queues. Techniques include extending opening hours or opening more days of the year, opening more admissions till when demand is high, taking them offline when demand subsides, increasing staffing levels in period of high demand, and enabling visitors' needs to be met more effectively when the site is so busy. Opening additional areas wherein cafeterias and other facilities during busy times. Offering or prescribing certain routes, thereby facilitating the free flow of visitors around the site, and cross-training staffs so that they can work in the busiest hour of the attraction according to the demand of the visitors. Such measures can be highly effective. However, in cases of many smaller heritage-based attractions, many capacity more flexible can be extremely problematic. Physical restrictions in the entire hall, for example, may limit the number of admissions tills that it is possibly to operate. Number 3, increasing capacity. In the longer term, visitor attraction may seek to address the problem of persistent excess demand by investing in additional physical capacity that can range from building an extension to the gift shop, to constructing an additional building to house particular parts of the collection or visitors' activity. The danger, however, is that such efforts may serve to reduce the authenticity of the site, reducing the quality of visitors' experience and potentially comprising efforts to conserve the resource base of the attraction for future generations. Number 4. Site hardening. Other impacts, particularly various forms of wear and tear, are traditionally addressed through the use of site hardening techniques, and this includes employing security people and room stewards, often volunteer at heritage-based attractions to provide a physical presence at sensitive locations, roofing off vulnerable parts of the site, the use of glass perspex or other materials to encase artifacts or divide off certain areas, strengthening footpaths, covering carpets with protective materials, and lastly, use of prohibitive notice. At least, at the extreme, site hardening can even take the form of the removal of original and their replacement with a facsimile. For example, visitors to Hereford Cathedral in England first see a facsimile of the ancient fragile Mappa Mundi, which they can examine closely before they get to see the original, which is safely cocooned behind glasses in its purpose building, but less accessible display area. Site hardening techniques can be extremely sophisticated. For example, a travelator system has been installed at the Tower of London to address the bottleneck at the Jewel House, where long queues would form at busy times. The travelators are switched on the busy times and allow visitors only to fixed amount of time to see each exhibit before they are whisked onward. And this is according to Shockley, 1999. The problem with almost all site hardening is, however, that it risks compromising the authenticity of the site. This may be a particular problem at heritage-based attractions, where a significant element of the visitor's experience may be to gain an insight into how the property may have looked in its heyday. The excessive use of such techniques may only run counter to the conservation objectives of the owner of the site. Lastly, restrictive ticketing and quota systems. Perhaps the most extreme of the supply-side measures available to manage visitors' impact is ticketing that restricts the time of entry, requiring pre-booking, the length of stay, the size of groups, and the number of visitors permitted per day, or some combinations of this. Such measures may be introduced to try to combat overcrowding or address particular forms of wear and tear, such as trampling or visitor-include humidity. An example of it is the tomb of Queen Nefertari in Egypt, refers to a previously where a daily quota of visitors have been set along with a maximum dwell time for each party. Visitors' attractions are typically reluctant to introduce such measures since they tend to discourage certain types of visitors, particularly independent visitors and small groups. The casual visitors, meanwhile, can be excluded entirely. Many managers of heritage visitors attraction do, however, prefer such measures to use the price incentives, which are considered to be even less acceptable.
Hi, I'm Hani, and in this video, we will be talking about demand management technique. This group of technique aims to influence the numbers or behavior of visitors in order to moderate their impact on sites and or its associated artifacts. The first technique that we are going to discuss is price incentives. One possible pricing technique for managing visitors' impact would be to use elevated admission prices to moderate overall levels of demand. Reducing the pressure of numbers could also help to address problems such as overcrowding of the site, traffic congestions, or trampling damages to footpaths. The use of elevated admission prices would also accord with the user pays principle, which state that those responsible for using resources that are vulnerable to damage should be required to pay for the remediation of any user-induced impacts. Increased admission prices can also much needed revenue to fund the attraction's wider strategic goals, such as conservation of the site or public education. A potential problem with using price incentives to damage overall levels of demand is that while the damage for visitors' attraction tend to be relatively price elastic or responsive at low prices. As admission prices rises above or a token level, demand tends to become increasingly price inelastic. In many cases, therefore, elevated admission prices would appear to be a rather blunt instrument in attempting to moderate demand in general. Charging elevated prices for admission is also highly unpopular among visitors' attraction managers. Indeed, to many in the heritage establishment, charging for admissions at all is considered repugnant. Among the main reasons offered for the standpoints are: first, charging elevated admission fees may conflict with the wider objectives of the visitors' attractions, such as equality access to all social groupings or public education. Second, attractions do not have a legal right to charge for access to public land or public buildings, or a moral right to charge for access to one's own heritage. Third, charging for admission may lead to a bias of concerns for those elements of our heritage that can mostly be sold to visitors. Fourth, the cost of collecting admission charges may, in some cases, outweigh the revenue collected. Next, high admission charges may act as a disincentive for impulse, casual, and repeat visitors. Then, secondary spend may fall if high admission charges are introduced. Lastly, charging may also reduce spending elsewhere in the local economy. And now, we will go to the second technique, which is the marketing. Other elements of the marketing mix than price can also be used to manage demand. Visit at off-peak times can be promoted through advertising or joint ticketing arrangements. Heavily used sites can be demarked, and less intensively used sites can be marketed as alternatives. It might even be desirable to develop new visitor attractions to deflect pressure from more sensitive sites. This has been the strategy adopted by Canterbury in England, for example, where new purpose-built attractions have been developed outside of the city center in an attempt to reduce the level of pedestrian overcrowding caused by the visitors to the cathedral. And now, we are down to the third and last demand management technique, which is the education and interpretation. Education and interpretation also have the potential to serve as tools for managing visitors' impact. Experience has shown that educating visitors about the negative impacts of certain forms of behavior, informing them how to behave appropriately, and encouraging them to act accordingly can have critical influence on their behavior both during and after the visit. The following advantages of this approach have been identified. First, people tend to react more positively to requests to refrain from certain forms of behavior when they know and understand the reason. Second, visitors' impact can be reduced by offering visitors a more engaging experience, which not only informs them about how to act responsibly, but also encourages them to act accordingly. Third, visitor movement, both in time and space, can be influenced. For example, by drawing attention to alternative routes around the sites, or substitute attractions or different visit times. Fourth, raising the public's conservation ethics may pay longer-term dividends for the visitor attractions in terms of contribution to charity and other good causes related either directly or indirectly to the work of the visitor attraction. Fifth, educational and interpretative facility can bring local economic benefits by employing local people, selling local products such as local handicrafts, providing services such as refreshment, and helping to diversify the local economy. Lastly, local community participation can also be enhanced through the provision of education and interpretation. For example, local people can help decide what to educate visitors about and what to interpret. Education and interpretation would in many ways appear the ideal solution to visitors' impact. The major difficulty with this approach, however, is that the demand for visitor attraction is typically based on recreational rather than educational motivations. While is it true that some visitors will be motivated by the desire to learn about the things that they are coming to see, the principal motivation for the typical visitor will be to relax and to have fun with friends and family. Indeed, going to visitor attractions has been said to be more akin to window shopping than a learning experience. Under such circumstances, it will probably always be difficult to influence visitors' behavior by means of education and interpretation.
Visitor attractions play an important role in the tourism industries of many countries. They also have an important role to play as stewards of the cultural and natural heritage of many countries. These roles often conflict, and one important source of conflict is the potential for visitors to compromise through a variety of impacts the very things that they come to see. Visitor attractions are required to walk a fine line between enabling the public to interact with various elements of their cultural and natural heritage on the one hand, and protecting those elements from negative impacts of those who come to visit them on the other. This chapter has identified a range of adverse impacts that people may have on the attractions they visit. A wide range of visitor management strategies are available to address these impacts, and this can be classified either as supply-side strategies, which attempt to increase the capacity of visitor attraction site to receive visitors without damaging it, or demand-side strategies, which aim to modify visitor behavior so that they reduce or even eliminate their impact on the site. A complicating factor is that visitor management may itself be considered to have impacts on the site, particularly if it involves modifying the site so as to compromise its authenticity or if intrudes overly on the quality of the visitor experience. Visitor management can itself have adverse impacts on the visitor attraction. The task of visitor management becomes one of balancing its benefits with its side effects, rather than simply introducing increasingly strict visitor management measures until visitor impacts are reduced to acceptable levels. So that is the end of Chapter 10 with the topic Managing Visitor Impacts. And this presentation is based from the book Managing Visitor Attractions, New Directions, 2nd edition 2008. Thank you for watching, and we hope that you learned something from this presentation.